The Alpha King found an Omega Maid's daughter, hiding to eat scraps. His reaction shocked the entire pack. Hunger has a sound. It is not the rumble of a stomach, but the high-pitched ringing in the ears when the cold bites through a threadbare dress. Arabella Whitrose knew that sound better than she knew her own mother's lullabies. The royal winter solstice banquet was roaring on the other side of the heavy oak doors, a symphony of clinking crystal, laughter, and the intoxicating scent of roasted venison. Arabella was on the wrong side of that door. She was the ghost in the scullery, the shadow amidst the garbage. She didn't want a crown. She didn't want a mate. She just wanted the half-eaten loaf of bread resting precariously on top of the refuse bin. She reached for it, her fingers trembling, unaware that the door behind her was opening, and the shadow falling over her belonged to the monster every Omega feared, Alistair Ravenshire, the Alpha King. The kitchens of Raven's Peak Castle were a chaotic hellscape of steam, shouting, and searing heat, but the alleyway behind them was a frozen purgatory. Snow, grey with soot, piled against the stone walls. Arabella Whitrose pressed herself into the alcove where the heat from the kitchen vents vented out, providing a meagre, damp warmth. She was 19, though her frame was so slight she looked younger. Her Omega scent was faint, almost non-existent, a mix of rainwater and wild violets, usually masked by the scent of lye soap and ash from her work in the laundry. "Keep the trays moving. The king demands the glaze be perfect." The shrill voice of Seraphina Greymont, the head housekeeper, and a high-ranking beta with delusions of royalty, cut through the night air. Arabella flinched. Seraphina took a twisted delight in tormenting the lower staff, particularly Arabella. It was Seraphina who had docked Arabella's rations 3 days ago for a stain on a tablecloth that hadn't even been Arabella's fault. 3 days on broth and water. The gnawing emptiness in Arabella's belly was a physical pain, a sharp claw scraping against her ribs. The back door swung open. A junior cook, distracted and hurried, tossed a tray of ruined appetizers into the large wooden refusid bin. Arabella held her breath. The door slammed shut. She waited 10 seconds. 20. She crept forward. The wind whipped her thin grey tunic around her legs. She wasn't wearing boots, only wrapped rags that were soaking wet. She reached the bin. There, resting on a bed of potato peels, was a pheasant leg. It was barely touched, discarded likely because the skin was slightly charred. To the king's guests, it was trash. To Arabella, it was life. She snatched it up, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. She didn't wait. She couldn't risk taking it back to the servants' quarters where the others might steal it. She crouched behind a stack of empty wine barrels, hidden in the darkest corner of the alley, and brought the cold meat to her lips. It was savoury, rich, and tasted like salvation. Tears pricked her eyes. Creak. The sound was subtle, not the heavy slam of the kitchen door, but the groaning of the heavy iron gate that led to the royal gardens, a place forbidden to staff. Arabella froze, the pheasant leg halfway to her mouth. She made herself small, curling into a ball, praying to the moon goddess that she was invisible. Heavy boots crunched on the snow. These were not the hurried steps of a servant. These were slow, predatory, heavy with authority. The air in the alley changed. The smell of garbage and soot was suddenly overpowered by a scent that made Arabella's wolf whimper in the back of her mind. Storm clouds, crushed pine, and metallic blood. Alpha. And not just any alpha. She squeezed her eyes shut. "Please walk past." "Please." The footsteps stopped, right in front of the barrels. "Is this how I feed my pack?" The voice was a low rumble, vibrating through the wood of the barrels and into Arabella's spine. It was Alistair Ravenshire, the Alpha King, the man rumoured to have ripped the throat out of a rogue bear with his human teeth. Arabella couldn't breathe. If she was found here, hiding, stealing scraps, Seraphina would have her flogged, or worse, exiled to the frozen wastes. A hand, large and gloved in black leather, gripped the top of the wine barrel. With effortless, terrifying strength, the heavy barrel was shoved aside as if it were made of paper. Arabella was exposed. She sat in the snow, clutching the gnawed bone of the pheasant leg, her face smeared with grease and dirt. She looked up, terror seizing her throat. Alistair Ravenshire towered over her. He was massive, his broad shoulders filling the narrow alley. His hair was black as a raven's wing, windswept and wild, contrasting with the immaculate tailoring of his velvet dress coat. But it was his eyes that froze her blood, amber, glowing with an inner beast, swirling with a fury that seemed to burn the very air. He looked at the bone in her hand. He looked at her rags. He looked at the trembling of her lips. Arabella dropped the bone. It fell into the snow with a soft thud. She scrambled to her knees, bowing her head so low her forehead touched the ice. "Mercy, Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice cracking. I was only—" "Stand up," he commanded. The tone wasn't angry. It was something far more dangerous. It was void of emotion entirely. Arabella shook her head, terrified. "I am forbidden to look upon you, sire. I said stand up." The command washed over her, an alpha order she could not resist. Her body obeyed against her will. She rose, shivering violently, her knees knocking together. She kept her eyes on his boots. Alistair stepped closer. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He reached out, his gloved hand tilting her chin up. Arabella gasped, forced to look into the predator's eyes. She expected disgust. She expected him to call for the guards. Instead, his nostrils flared. He inhaled sharply, a frown creasing his forehead. His thumb brushed the dirt on her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw. "You are starving," he stated. It wasn't a question. The winter is hard, sire," she stammered. "Who are you?" "Arabella, daughter of the laundress, Martha." Alistair looked at the discarded bone in the snow, then back at her. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then he did the unthinkable. He unclasped his heavy fur-lined cloak, a garment worth more than Arabella would earn in 10 lifetimes, and swung it around her shoulders. The weight of it nearly buckled her knees. It smelled of him. It was warm. "Come," he said, turning back toward the castle. Arabella blinked. "Sire? The dungeons are that way." She pointed toward the guardhouse. Alistair stopped. He turned his head slightly, his profile sharp and lethal in the moonlight. "We are not going to the dungeons, Arabella. You are still hungry. And tonight, you will eat." The great hall of Raven's Peak was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture. Chandeliers made of antlers and diamonds hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a golden glow over the 300 guests. The elite of the pack, wealthy betas, powerful visiting alphas, and the High Council were in the midst of a toast. Edmund Hawklight, the king's oldest advisor, and a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, raised his goblet. "To King Alistair, may his reign remain unbroken." "To the king!" The crowd roared. The heavy double doors at the far end of the hall boomed open, cutting the celebration short. The music died instantly. King Alistair strode in. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. But it wasn't his return that caused the collective gasp that sucked the air out of the room. It was the girl walking beside him. Arabella was drowning in the king's cloak, the black fur dragging on the floor behind her. Her hair was a matted mess of brown curls, her face smudged with soot, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the polished marble floor. She looked like a beggar dragged from the gutter, which she was. Alistair did not walk quickly. He matched his pace to hers, forcing the entire court to watch every step. He kept a hand firmly on her shoulder, steering her not to the side, but straight down the center aisle toward the high table. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "Is that a servant? Look at her feet. Why is she wearing the royal mantle?" Serafina Greymont, standing near the punch bowls, dropped her crystal ladle. It shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Her face went pale, then red with indignation. She rushed forward, blocking the king's path, her eyes fixed venomously on Arabella. "Your Majesty!" Serafina simpered, her voice trembling with false concern. "Oh, this is mortifying. How did this filth get past the guards? Come here, you little rat!" Serafina reached out to grab Arabella's arm. Alistair didn't shout. He didn't growl. He simply caught Serafina's wrist in mid-air. The snap of bone was audible. Serafina shrieked, falling to her knees. The hall gasped. Alistair released her hand as if it were a dead leaf. "Touch her again," Alistair said, his voice projecting to the back of the hall without effort, "and you will lose the hand." Arabella was shaking so hard she thought she might faint. She tried to pull away, to hide, but Alistair's grip on her shoulder tightened, grounding her. "My lord," Cedric Ashbourne, the captain of the guard, stepped forward, his hand on his sword hilt, confused. "Is there a threat?" "The threat," Alistair said, scanning the room, meeting the eyes of his nobles, "is that while you gorge yourselves on glazed pheasant and wine, a member of my pack was eating garbage in the snow 3 feet from your warmth." He looked down at Arabella. "Sit." He pointed to the chair at his right hand, the chair reserved for a queen or a highly honored guest. Currently, it was occupied by Leopold Blackwell, a visiting alpha from the Southern Territories who had been trying to negotiate a trade deal all evening. Leopold blinked, his jaw tightening. He was a handsome man, but cruel, known for his vanity. "Your Majesty? Surely you jest. You want me to move for this?" Alistair stared at Leopold. The air around the king began to distort with heat. His alpha aura flooded the room, heavy and suffocating, forcing the weaker wolves to bare their necks in submission. "Move," Alistair growled, "or I will move you." Leopold stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. He bowed stiffly, his eyes flashing with humiliation, and retreated to a lower table. Alistair guided Arabella to the velvet chair. She sat, shrinking into the cushions. The table was laden with food, roasted boar, fruits, warm breads, cheeses. "Eat," Alistair commanded, taking his own seat. Arabella looked at the hundreds of eyes staring at her. She looked at the silverware, silver and heavy. She didn't know which fork to use. She looked at her dirty hands. I can't, sire," she whispered. "I will dirty the linen." Alistair picked up a silver platter of sliced beef. He placed it directly in front of her. He took a napkin, dipped it in his water goblet, and gently took her hand. The entire court watched in stunned silence as the Alpha King, the butcher of the north, wiped the soot from the fingers of a scullery maid. "The linen can be washed," Alistair said softly, for her ears alone. "Starvation cannot be undone. Eat, Arabella. That is an order." She took a piece of bread. She took a bite, then another. And as the flavor hit her tongue, she forgot the crowd. She forgot Serafina's glare. She ate, and for the first time in her life, she felt safe. But across the room, Edmund Hawklight watched with narrow, calculating eyes. He leaned over to a shadowed figure beside him, Lady Evelina, the king's estranged aunt. "This is a problem," Edmund murmured. "Or an opportunity," Evelina replied, her gaze fixed on the way the king watched the girl eat. "He looks at her as if she is precious metal found in the dirt." "She is a weakness," Edmund hissed, "and in the obsidian pack, weaknesses are culled." The sun had not yet risen when Arabella woke up. For a moment she panicked, thrashing against the sheets. They were too soft. The air was too warm. She sat up, gasping. She was not on her straw pallet in the laundry storage. She was in a bed large enough to sleep 5 people. The canopy above her was emerald silk. A fire crackled in a marble hearth across the room. Memory rushed back. The bone, the king, the banquet. She threw the covers off. She was wearing a nightgown of white linen, clean and dry. Someone must have changed her while she slept. She vaguely remembered falling asleep at the table, the exhaustion finally claiming her. I have to get out. I have to get back to the kitchens before Serafina realizes I'm gone. She scrambled out of bed, her feet sinking into a plush rug. She ran to the heavy oak door and pulled the handle. Locked. Panic surged. Was she a prisoner? Was this a twisted game? Had Alistair fattened her up only to hunt her for sport? Rumours about the Alpha King were dark. They said he had no heart, that the curse upon his bloodline made him cruel. "Hello," she called out, pounding on the door. "Please, I have work to do." The lock clicked. The door swung inward. Standing there was not a guard, but a young woman with kind eyes, carrying a basin of steaming water and a stack of towels. Following her was a stern-faced guard in the black and silver livery of the king's personal regiment. "Good morning, Mistress Arabella," the maid said, dipping a curtsy. "I am Ilara. The king has requested you be bathed and dressed." "Dressed for what?" Arabella asked, backing away. "Am I to be punished?" Ilara looked confused. "Punished? No, mistress. You are to join him for breakfast in the solar." Arabella felt dizzy. "I don't belong there. Please, just let me go back to the laundry." The guard spoke then. "King's orders, miss. No one leaves this wing without his say-so. Especially not you." The next hour was a blur of lavender-scented water and scrubbing. Ilara washed Arabella's hair 3 times until the soot was gone and the chestnut locks shone with gold highlights. She dressed Arabella in a gown of deep blue wool, simple, but of a quality Arabella had never touched. When she was led through the stone corridors, the castle seemed different. The servants they passed didn't sneer at her. They averted their eyes, bowing low. Fear. They were afraid of her now, or rather, afraid of who had claimed her. They arrived at the solar, a room with walls made of glass overlooking the snowy valley. Alistair was standing by the window, his back to her. He was not in formal wear today, but in a loose white shirt and dark trousers, looking more like a man and less like a monument. "Leave us," Alistair said. The guard and Ilara vanished instantly. Arabella stood by the door, wringing her hands. "Sire." Alistair turned. His amber eyes swept over her, pausing on her face. The grime was gone, revealing high cheekbones and large, doe-like eyes the colour of honey. He seemed to stop breathing for a second. "Come to the window," he said. She obeyed, moving slowly. "Look down there," he pointed to the courtyard below. Arabella looked. In the centre of the training grounds, Serafina was kneeling in the snow. Beside her was the master of discipline. Serafina was holding a bucket of water and a scrubbing brush, cleaning the cobblestones in the freezing cold. Arabella gasped. She is high staff. That is scullery work." "She denied you food," Alistair said, his voice hard. "She abused her station. Now she will learn what it feels like to freeze while working for crumbs." Arabella looked up at him. "You did this for me." "I did it for justice," Alistair corrected, though his eyes softened. "Cruelty has no place in my pack. I was blind to it, buried in my war maps and council meetings. You opened my eyes, Arabella." He turned fully toward her. "But there is something else." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. Arabella's heart hammered against her ribs. He leaned down, inhaling near her neck. "Yesterday in the alley I smelled fear and hunger. But today," he frowned, "why do you smell of rain and violets? That is an omega scent. I am an Omega, sire. My mother was one. And your father? Arabella looked down. I never knew him. Mother said he was a soldier who died in the Great War. Alistair hummed, a low vibration in his chest. Strange, because beneath the violets there is something else. Something dormant. He reached out and took her hand. His skin was rough, calloused from the sword. As his palm touched hers, a spark, literal static electricity, snapped between them. Arabella yelped and pulled back. Alistair stared at his own hand, then at her. His eyes widened slightly. Did you feel that? He asked. It was just a shock, sire. The rug. No, Alistair whispered, a look of intensity replacing his calm facade. That was not the rug. Before he could say more, the heavy doors burst open. Cedric Ashbourne rushed in, his face pale. My king, you must come. It's the northern border. Alistair's expression instantly hardened into stone. The moment was broken. He looked at Arabella. Stay here. Do not leave this room. Do not open the door for anyone but me or Cedric. Sire, there are wolves in this castle who would see you dead simply because I showed you kindness, Alistair said grimly. I have put a target on your back, Arabella. Now I must ensure you survive it. He swept out of the room, leaving Arabella alone in the glass room. She walked to the window, watching the king stride across the courtyard below. As she watched, she absent-mindedly touched a silver goblet on the table. The metal instantly tarnished, turning black under her fingertips. Arabella snatched her hand back, staring in horror. The silver hadn't just tarnished, it had warped, as if melted by extreme heat. She looked at her hands. They looked normal, but deep inside her chest, something was waking up. A heat that matched the fire in the king's eyes. She wasn't just a maid, and Alistair wasn't just saving a beggar. Fate had dealt a hand that would shatter the obsidian pack, and the game had just begun. 3 days passed since King Alistair had ridden for the northern border. To Arabella, they felt like 3 years. She remained confined to the royal wing, a gilded cage of silk and velvet. While Ilara, her maid, was kind, the isolation was maddening. The castle staff whispered whenever she passed a window. The guards watched her with a mixture of awe and suspicion. She was the scullery queen, a title mocked in the lower servant quarters and feared in the upper courts. But it was the silver goblet that haunted her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the metal warping beneath her fingertips. She had tested it since, touching a spoon, a door handle, but nothing happened. Had she imagined it? Was it a trick of the light, or a symptom of the strange, burning fever that seemed to ebb and flow in her veins since Alistair had wrapped his cloak around her? I need to leave this room, Arabella announced on the 4th morning. Cedric Ashbourne, the captain of the guard who had been left in charge of her safety, stood by the door. He was a mountain of a man, loyal to a fault, but his patience was wearing thin. The king's orders were specific, mistress. You are safe here. I am bored here, Sir Cedric, Arabella countered, surprising herself with her own boldness. And I am not a prisoner. If I am to stay in this castle, I wish to be useful, or at least informed. Cedric sighed, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. What do you want? The library, she said. I want to read. Cedric hesitated, then nodded. Very well, but I accompany you, and you speak to no one. The Royal Library of Raven's Peak was a cathedral of knowledge. Spiral staircases wound up pillars of books that reached the vaulted ceiling. The air smelled of old paper and magic. Arabella had never been allowed inside. She had only ever polished the brass handles of its massive doors. She didn't wander aimlessly. She went straight to the section labeled Genealogy and Service Records. If her father had been a soldier who died in the Great War, his name would be in the ledger of the fallen. Her mother, Martha, had never spoken his name, only that he was a hero. Arabella pulled the heavy leather-bound tome for the year of her birth. Her fingers traced the lines of names. Smith, Miller, Cooper. She searched for Whitrose. Nothing. She searched for any soldier linked to Martha Whitrose. Nothing. "You're looking for ghosts, child." The voice was smooth, like oil sliding over stone. Arabella spun around. Edmund Hawklight stood in the shadow of a bookshelf. The king's advisor wore robes of crimson and gold, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his eyes sharp and reptilian. "Lord Hawklight," Cedric grunted, stepping between Arabella and the advisor. "We were just leaving." "Nonsense, Captain," Edmund smiled, stepping closer. "I am merely offering assistance. I know every name in those books. I wrote many of them myself." He looked at Arabella, his gaze piercing. "You look for your father." Arabella swallowed hard. "My mother said he was a soldier." "Martha," Edmund mused, tasting the name. "Yes, I remember her. Beautiful, gentle, far too delicate for the laundry. She was a lady-in-waiting once, did you know?" Arabella's eyes widened. "That's impossible. She was poor. She was disgraced," Edmund corrected softly. "Cast out, stripped of her rank, because she fell in love with a man she couldn't have, a man whose name was erased from this library long ago." "Who?" Arabella whispered, stepping out from behind Cedric. "Who was he?" Edmund leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A traitor, my dear. A man who sought to overthrow the crown. Your blood is not just common, it is tainted." "That is enough," Cedric barked, grabbing Arabella's arm gently. "We are leaving." Edmund chuckled as they retreated. "Ask the king when he returns, girl. Ask him why he really saved you. It wasn't charity, it was guilt." Arabella's heart pounded as Cedric marched her back to her room. Tainted. The word echoed in her mind. Was that why she felt this heat? Was that why the silver warped? Was she the daughter of a monster? She reached for the door handle of her room. She was upset, her emotions a chaotic storm. As her hand touched the brass knob, the metal hissed. She pulled back with a gasp. The heavy brass knob was glowing red-hot. It melted, dripping like wax onto the stone floor. Cedric stared at the molten puddle, then at Arabella. His face went pale. "By the moon," Cedric whispered. "You're not just an Omega." Arabella stared at her hands, shaking. "What am I?" Before Cedric could answer, a horn blew in the distance, a deep, resonant sound that shook the castle foundations. "The king," Cedric said, his demeanor shifting instantly to relief. "Alistair is home." The return of the Alpha King was usually a solemn affair, reports of casualties, distribution of spoils. But tonight was different. Tonight was the Moon Festival, the sacred night when the moon was fullest, and the pack celebrated the bonds of mate and kin. The courtyard was lit by thousands of floating lanterns. Drums beat a primal rhythm that synced with the heart of every wolf present. Arabella stood on the balcony of her room, watching the procession. She saw him instantly. Alistair rode a massive black stallion, his armor stained with the dust of the road, his face weary. Yet, even from this distance, his head snapped up. His eyes locked onto hers on the balcony. The connection was physical, a tug in her chest so strong she gripped the railing to keep from falling. He didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed. He was home. An hour later, Elara burst into the room, holding a dress that looked like it was woven from starlight. "The king commands your presence at the festival." Elara beamed. "I can't," Arabella argued, backing away. Edmund said, "Everyone will stare. They think I'm the daughter of a traitor." "Let them stare," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Alistair stood there. He had washed and changed into formal regalia, a tunic of charcoal silk embroidered with silver thread. He looked devastatingly royal, yet his eyes were soft as they held hers. "Sire," Arabella curtsied low. "Leave us," Alistair ordered Ilara. When they were alone, he crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that she could smell the soap and pine on his skin. "Cedric told me about the door handle," Alistair said quietly. Arabella flinched. "I will pay for it." "I don't know how. I don't care about the brass, Arabella," he interrupted. "I care that you are afraid of your own strength." "What is happening to me?" she pleaded, looking up at him. "Edmund said my father was a traitor. Is that why I'm wrong?" Alistair's jaw tightened. "Edmund speaks in half-truths to poison you. Your father was no traitor to the pack. He was a threat to the status quo. And you are not wrong, Arabella. You are rare." He held out his hand. "Come, walk with me. Not as a servant, as my guest." "They will hate me," she whispered. "They will respect you," Alistair vowed, his eyes flashing amber. "Because you are with me." Walking into the moon festival on the arm of the Alpha King was like walking into a fire. The music didn't stop, but the conversation did. Hundreds of wolves turned to watch. Serafina was there, her arm in a cast, lurking near the wine barrels with eyes full of hate. Leopold Blackwell watched from a corner, swirling his goblet, a smirk playing on his lips. Edmund Hawklight observed with a cold, analytical detachment. Alistair led her to the centre of the dance floor. The musicians, sensing the command in his posture, began a slow, haunting waltz. He placed a hand on her waist. The heat flare was immediate, rushing through her dress, warming her skin. "Breathe," he murmured, guiding her through the steps. "Everyone is watching," she squeaked. "Let them," he said. "Look at me." "Only me." Arabella looked up. In the golden light of the lanterns, the king looked less like a monster and more like a man burdened by the world. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Why did you save me?" Alistair's hand tightened on her waist. He pulled her a fraction closer. The scent of her, violets and rain, was overwhelming him. His wolf was pacing in his mind, chanting mine. "Mine. Mine." "Because," Alistair said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion, "when I found you in the snow, for the first time in 10 years, the cold inside me stopped." The music swelled. The crowd blurred. For a moment, it was just the 2 of them. Alistair leaned down. His forehead rested against hers. The intimacy was shocking, a public declaration that defied all laws of the pack. An Alpha King did not bow his head to a scullery maid, unless she was his mate. The word hung in the air, unspoken, but felt by everyone. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the moment. A servant had dropped a tray of goblets near the edge of the courtyard. The spell broke. Alistair pulled back, blinking as if waking from a dream. He looked around, seeing the stunned faces of his court. He realized he had nearly claimed her right there, in front of the council, without securing her safety first. He stiffened, his alpha mask sliding back into place. The dance is done. He stepped away, leaving Arabella cold and trembling in the center of the floor. "Captain Ashbourne," Alistair called out, his voice clipped. "Escort Mistress Arabella back to her chambers. I have matters of state to discuss with Lord Blackwell." Arabella felt the rejection like a physical slap. One moment, he was about to kiss her. The next, he was the king again. She nodded, holding back tears, and allowed Cedric to lead her away. She didn't see the look of agony on Alistair's face as he watched her go, and she didn't see the subtle nod Leopold Blackwell gave to Serafina across the room. The distraction had worked. The king was separated from his prize. The morning after the festival, the atmosphere in the castle was tense. Alistair was locked in the war room with his generals. Arabella was back in her room, pacing. She felt foolish. She had let herself believe, for one beautiful song, that the fairy tale was real, that the king could love the maid. But his abrupt dismissal had reminded her of her place. A knock came at the door. It wasn't Alara. It was a young page boy, looking terrified. "Mistress," he squeaked. "A message. From the kitchens." He thrust a crumpled piece of parchment into her hand and ran before the guards could stop him. Arabella unfolded the paper. Her breath hitched. It was written in charcoal, in a shaky, familiar scrawl. "Bella, Serafina knows. She knows about the silver. She says she will report you for witchcraft unless you meet me. I have proof of who your father really was. Come to the old drying sheds behind the north garden. Come alone or I burn the papers." "Martha." "Mother!" Arabella gasped. She looked at the door. Cedric had been called away to the training grounds. Only 2 junior guards remained. If Serafina accused her of witchcraft, of the strange heat and melting metal, Arabella would be executed. The pack laws were strict about uncontrolled magic, and if her mother had proof of her father, she had to go. "I need fresh air," Arabella told the guards. "I will walk in the north garden." The guards hesitated, but nodded. "Stay within the walls, mistress." Arabella walked calmly until she reached the hedge maze of the north garden. Once inside, she ran. She slipped through a gap in the stone wall she had used as a child to sneak out. The drying sheds were abandoned, rotting wooden structures on the edge of the forest. The wind howled, carrying the scent of snow and decay. "Mother?" Arabella called out, stepping into the gloom of the largest shed. "I'm here." The door slammed shut behind her. Arabella spun around. It wasn't her mother. Serafina stood there, cradling her broken arm, her face twisted in a sneer. But she wasn't alone. 2 large mercenaries, rogues by the smell of them, unwashed and feral, stepped out of the shadows. "You really are stupid," Serafina laughed. "Did you think the king would protect you forever?" "Where is my mother?" Arabella demanded, backing away. "Scrubbing floors where she belongs," Serafina spat. "She knows nothing of this." "Let me go," Arabella warned. Her hands began to heat up. "Or the king will kill you." "The king?" A new voice spoke from the shadows. Leopold Blackwell emerged, wearing a pristine fur coat. He looked at Arabella with cold, calculating amusement. "The king will be too busy negotiating the return of his beloved pet to kill anyone." "You want to ransom me?" Arabella asked. "Ransom?" "No," Leopold smirked, circling her. "I want to break him. Alistair is arrogant. He thinks he is untouchable. But every alpha has a weakness. He revealed his last night on the dance floor." He gestured to the mercenaries. "Grab her!" "No!" Arabella screamed. She thrust her hands out. A blast of heat erupted from her palms, knocking one mercenary back. His coat caught fire. Leopold's eyes widened. "Elemental fire? Well, well, you are worth more than I thought." Before she could strike again, Serafina lunged forward and smashed a heavy wooden plank over the back of Arabella's head. Pain exploded. The world tilted. Arabella fell to the dusty floor, her vision swimming. The last thing she saw was Leopold standing over her, smiling. "Take her to the carriage," Leopold ordered. "We ride for the southern territories. By the time Alistair realizes she is gone, we will be across the border." High in the war room, Alistair Ravenshire suddenly stopped mid-sentence. He dropped his quill. His hand flew to his chest, clutching the fabric of his tunic. A roar of pain ripped through his mind, a sharp, sudden darkness that wasn't his own. "My king?" Edmund Hawklight asked, concerned. Alistair's eyes turned pitch black. His wolf surfaced, feral and terrified. "Arabella," he snarled. He didn't use the door. He turned and shattered the floor-to-ceiling glass window with his shoulder, leaping out into the snowy courtyard 3 stories below. He landed in a crouch, the stone cracking beneath his boots, and let out a howl that shook the snow from the trees. The hunt was on. The window of the war room was a jagged maw of broken glass, wind howling through it like a lament. Inside, the generals stood frozen, staring at the empty space where their king had been a heartbeat before. Outside, a beast landed on the cobblestones. It was not a man. It was a wolf of nightmare proportions, midnight black fur standing on end, muscles coiling like steel cables, and eyes burning with the raw, molten amber of pure alpha fury. Alistair did not stop to shift back. He did not stop to issue orders. He simply threw his head back and let out a roar that shattered windows in the servants' quarters 3 wings away. It was a summons, a command so powerful it brought every wolf in the castle to their knees. Hunt! Cedric Ashbourne, sprinting from the training grounds, saw the massive black wolf tear through the iron portcullis as if it were made of straw. Cedric didn't hesitate. He shifted mid-stride, his grey timber wolf form landing beside his king. Within moments, the elite king's guard, 20 of the strongest warriors in the pack, had shifted and joined the formation. They didn't need a scent. Alistair was the compass. The mate bond, now ripped open and bleeding panic, was a beacon that pulled him south. The chase was brutal. The snow was waist-deep in the valley, but the wolves moved like oil over water. Alistair pushed them to a breaking point. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm. She is afraid. She is hurt. She is gone. Ahead, the tracks of a heavy carriage cut deep ruts into the frozen mud of the old trade road. They were heading for the Iron Pass, the border between the Obsidian Pack and Leopold's southern territories. If they crossed that line, any rescue attempt would be an act of war. Alistair didn't care about war. He would burn the entire continent to ash to get her back. Through the bond, he felt a sudden spike of agony, a throbbing headache that wasn't his. They struck her. The black wolf snarled, a sound of pure demonic rage. He surged forward, leaving his guard behind, his paws tearing up the earth. The landscape blurred. Trees became streaks of grey. The wind bit at his eyes, but he felt nothing but the burning need to kill. 10 miles ahead, the carriage rattled dangerously over the icy stones. Inside, Arabella lay on the floor, her hands bound with silver-laced rope that burned her skin. Serafina sat on the bench above her, kicking Arabella's ribs every time she groaned. "Quiet, trash!" Serafina hissed. "We are nearly at the pass." Leopold looked out the window, his expression tightening. "Faster!" he yelled to the driver. "The storm is getting worse." It wasn't a storm. The clouds gathering above them were swirling in an unnatural vortex, mirroring the chaos of the Alpha pursuing them. "Do you hear that?" one of the mercenaries asked, his voice trembling. A low rumble, deeper than thunder, vibrated through the floorboards of the carriage. Then the howl came. It wasn't distant. It was right on top of them. Leopold drew his sword. "He's here." The impact was cataclysmic. A massive black shape slammed into the side of the carriage, flipping the heavy wooden vehicle as if it were a toy. Wood splintered, metal screamed, and the horses broke their traces, fleeing in terror. The carriage rolled twice, crashing into a snowbank. Arabella was thrown against the ceiling, then the floor. Pain flared in her shoulder, but the adrenaline numbed it. The door above her was ripped off its hinges. Leopold crawled out, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, dragging Arabella by her hair. "Get up!" he screamed, hauling her into the snow. "Use her as a shield. He won't attack if I have her throat." Serafina scrambled out after them, clutching a dagger, her eyes wide with terror. The 2 mercenaries formed a shaky line in front of them. And then the Alpha King emerged from the steam of his own breath. Alistair shifted. The transformation was fluid, terrifying. One moment a beast, the next a naked man cloaked in shadow and fury. He didn't look cold. He looked like the avatar of death. He walked toward them, his steps slow, deliberate. "Leopold," Alistair said. The voice was human, but the timber was all wolf. Let her go, and I will grant you a quick death. Leopold laughed, though it sounded hysterical. He pressed his sword against Arabella's neck. A thin line of blood appeared on her pale skin. "Take another step and she dies," Leopold shrieked. "You think you can win, Ravenshire? I have an army waiting at the border." "I don't see an army," Alistair growled, his eyes locked on the drop of blood sliding down Arabella's neck. "I see a dead man walking." The mercenaries charged, screaming to hide their fear. Alistair didn't even draw a weapon. He moved with a blur of speed that the human eye couldn't track. He caught the first mercenary by the throat, crushing his windpipe with a sickening crunch. The second mercenary swung an axe. Alistair caught the handle, snapped the wood, and backhanded the man with enough force to shatter his jaw. 2 seconds. 2 bodies in the snow. Leopold's confidence shattered. He began to drag Arabella backward toward the cliff edge. "Stay back! I'll drop her! I swear it!" Serafina, seeing her protection vanish, lunged at Arabella with her dagger. "Die, you witch!" "No!" Alistair roared, launching himself forward. But he was too far away. The blade was inches from Arabella's heart. Time seemed to slow. Arabella looked at Alistair, his face twisted in desperation, and then at the woman who had tormented her for years. Something inside Arabella snapped. The fear evaporated, replaced by a white-hot inferno. "I am not a victim!" Arabella screamed, but it wasn't a sound of terror. It was a release. A shockwave of pure, blinding fire exploded from her body. It wasn't normal fire. It was blue-white, the hottest flame of the spectrum. It incinerated the ropes binding her wrists instantly. The blast hit Serafina squarely in the chest, throwing her 20 feet through the air. She landed in a snowdrift, unconscious and smoking. Leopold was knocked backward, his coat catching fire. He rolled in the snow, shrieking, batting at the flames. Arabella stood in the center of the melted crater of snow, her hair floating as if underwater, her eyes glowing with the same amber light as Alistair's, but rimmed with violet fire. Alistair stopped. He stared at her, awe washing over his rage. "Elementalist," he whispered. Leopold, burned and desperate, scrambled to his feet. He saw Alistair distracted. He saw his chance. He pulled a hidden crossbow from his boot and aimed not at Alistair, but at Arabella. "If I can't have the power," Leopold snarled, "no one can." He pulled the trigger. The bolt flew. Arabella, exhausted by the burst of magic, didn't see it. But Alistair did. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He threw his body in front of hers. Thud. The bolt struck Alistair deep in the chest, piercing the armor of muscle and lodging near his heart. "Alistair!" Arabella's scream tore through the valley. The king fell to his knees, blood pouring from his lips. Leopold laughed, a wet, triumphant sound. "The king is dead! The pack is—" His victory was cut short. Arabella turned to him. There was no mercy in her eyes now, only judgment. She raised a hand. A whip of liquid fire lashed out, wrapping around Leopold's ankles. She yanked. Leopold flew off the cliff edge, his scream fading into the abyss below. Arabella dropped to her knees in the snow, catching Alistair before he collapsed. The fire in her veins died instantly, replaced by a cold terror, deeper than the winter around them. "No, no, no," she sobbed, pressing her hands over the wound. "Stay with me. Please stay with me." Alistair looked up at her, his vision greying. He reached up, his bloody hand cupping her cheek. "You fought," he wheezed, a faint smile touching his lips. "My brave girl." "Don't you dare die," she commanded, tears falling onto his face. "I order you, as your mate." Alistair's eyes widened slightly. She had accepted the bond. "My queen," he breathed. And then his eyes closed. The healing halls of Raven's Peak smelled of antiseptic and ozone. For 3 days the king had lain in a coma, the poison on the crossbow bolt fighting against his alpha healing. Arabella had not left his side. She sat in a chair beside the bed, still wearing the tattered remains of her dress, refusing to eat or sleep. Her hand held his, her thumb tracing the calluses on his palm. The council was in chaos. Edmund Hawklight was demanding a regent be named. Specifically, himself. He claimed Arabella was a witch who had bewildered the king and caused the war with the South. "She must be removed," Edmund shouted in the hallway, loud enough for Arabella to hear. "She is a danger to the pack." The door to the infirmary banged open. Edmund marched in, followed by 4 guards. "Seize her," Edmund ordered, pointing a manicured finger at Arabella. "The king is incapacitated. By the authority of the council, I arrest you for treason and sorcery." The guards hesitated. They looked at the girl holding the king's hand. They remembered the rumors of the fire in the valley. "I said seize her," Edmund shrieked. Arabella stood up. She didn't let go of Alistair's hand. She turned to face them. She was exhausted, pale and small. But when she spoke, her voice had the weight of a mountain. "Get out," Edmund sneered. "You have no authority here, laundry girl. You are a bastard child of a traitor." "Is she?" The voice came from the bed. Edmund froze. Alistair's eyes were open. They were glassy with pain, but the amber fire was there. He gripped Arabella's hand, using her strength to pull himself up. "My king!" The guards dropped to their knees instantly. Edmund turned the colour of old milk. "Your Majesty, you are awake. We were just securing the room." "You were trying to steal my throne," Alistair rasped. He looked at Arabella. "Help me up." "You shouldn't move," she whispered. "I need to address my pack." 10 minutes later, the Alpha King entered the great hall, leaning heavily on Arabella. The entire court was assembled, summoned by the news of his waking. Alistair led Arabella to the dais. He did not sit on his throne. He stood before it. "Edmund Hawklight claims this woman is the daughter of a traitor," Alistair announced, his voice gaining strength with every word. "He claims her blood is tainted." He looked at Cedric. "Bring the records." Cedric Ashbourne stepped forward, carrying an old, burned ledger that had been recovered from Leopold's carriage, papers Leopold had stolen from the archives years ago to blackmail the council. "Read the entry for Whitrose," Alistair commanded. Cedric opened the book and read aloud, his voice echoing in the silent hall. "Marcus Whitrose, rank Alpha Prime, title Guardian of the Flame, status executed by order of Councilman Edmund Hawklight for refusing to cull the elemental bloodline." A gasp ripped through the room. Arabella stared at Edmund. "My father was a guardian." "Your father was the strongest wolf of his generation," Alistair said, glaring at Edmund, "and Edmund killed him to keep the council in power. He feared the elementals would rule over the bureaucrats." Edmund fell to his knees, sobbing. "It was for the stability of the pack. Their power is too great. She is a monster." "She is not a monster," Alistair roared, the sound shaking the dust from the banners. "She is the daughter of heroes, and she saved your king when you were plotting to replace him." Alistair turned to Arabella. He took her face in his hands, ignoring the hundreds of people watching. "You are not a scullery maid. You never were. You are the fire that this pack lost. You are my savior." He went down on one knee. The court stopped breathing. The Alpha King, unbowed by any enemy, knelt before the girl in rags. "Arabella Whitrose," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I do not offer you a crown to elevate you. I offer it because I am unworthy to stand beside you without it. Will you be my mate? My queen? My equal in all things?" Arabella looked at the man who had found her eating scraps in the snow. She saw the love in his eyes, raw, terrifying, and beautiful. She didn't look at the nobles. She didn't look at the guards. She looked at him. "I will," she whispered, "on one condition." Alistair smiled, a true, dazzling smile. Name it. No one in this pack goes hungry, ever again. Alistair kissed her hand, sealing the vow. It is done. He stood, pulling her into his arms, and kissed her. And as their lips met, a pillar of violet fire and amber light erupted around them, shooting up through the glass ceiling and into the night sky, a beacon for all the north to see. The Scullery Queen had risen, and the Obsidian Pack would never be the same. The reign of King Alistair and Queen Arabella is now a legend told to pups by the firelight. They say the winter is less harsh in Raven's Peak now, warmed by the eternal flame of the Queen. They say the dungeons are empty and the granaries are full. Seraphina Greymont spent the rest of her days scrubbing the floors she once scorned, learning humility in the silence of stone. Edmund Hawklight was exiled to the wastes, a king of nothing but ice and regret. But the greatest lesson wasn't in the laws they passed or the wars they won. It was in the simple truth that power is not found in a title or a bloodline or a crown of gold. True power is found in the hand that reaches down into the dark to lift another up. It is found in the courage to love what the world calls broken. For it was not the Alpha's strength that saved the pack, but the Omega's heart, a heart that knew the value of a scrap of bread, and therefore knew the value of everything. Enjoyed this story? If Arabella's journey from the ashes to the throne moved you, please like this story, share it with your own pack, and subscribe for more tales of fated mates, forbidden magic, and love that conquers all. Let the Moon Goddess guide your path until we meet again.